In my last video, I showed you how to create this Santa graphic, or more specifically, the line work for it. This week, I'm showing you how to color it. Hello my friends, welcome back to another video. My name is Rob from Button Press Graphics, back with another tutorial. Last week you may remember that I went through all the different aspects of doing line work and created this little Santa graphic. Well, this week I'm going to show you my method for colouring it in. Now there are a few different ways that you could go about doing this. I'm going to show you probably one of the easiest, but it has the longest setup. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, if you're wanting to follow along with me at home, then you can do so. Simply navigate to the Button Press Graphics channel page, go over to the community tab, and you will find a post with the sketch on it. Now, to begin with, we are going to open up the file that we were using previously, which is the Santa file. Now, I don't know where you've got yours saved, but if you need to get it, you can go to File, and you can either open and then navigate to the relevant place that you saved your file, or you can come to your Open Recent, which is what I tend to do. And as you can see, I was working on it last, so I can just select that, and because it's the SVG file, that means that all the changes that we made previously are still there. Now, to begin with, we are going to take this entire shape and we're going to open up the layers menu, which is at the top right here, signified by these three dashes. When you select it, this will open up. Now, as I said, the method that I'm going to be using today takes longer to set up, but makes things a whole lot easier. But just in case, I am going to show you another method. If you have watched the Paint Bucket tool tutorial that I did, then you will know exactly how this works. We come to the Paint Bucket on the left hand side, and then if I was to change the colour to say red, we can use the Paint Bucket to fill in the gaps, just like so. But that is a fill. So what happens when you come against the shapes that don't have a genuine fill like this one? That is a complete shape, as you know from the previous tutorial. This one, his beard, is not. So if I was to select this and then zoom right in, as you can see, this has not really covered it. So you can by all means go through all of the areas using the Paint Bucket tool, and you can use the grow and shrink by rate here to tweak it and get it looking exactly how you would like it. However, you might still have to go around with the edit paths by nodes and get hold of each of the corners and of course move them around so they can layer behind the stroke. But this is very tedious and it just doesn't seem to work from my personal opinion. So today I'm going to show you the method that I use. For this method, I need to show you a couple of things. As you know, we have the main border shape, and it is already a path, as signified by the name right here. However, it isn't a standard path. It is a large shape with no fill and one stroke. So what we need to do is we need to change that. But if we was to select everything, because there are varying paths and strokes within this design, we are going to find, if we go to path and stroke to path, that everything that we use the tapered stroke on has not worked. It has reverted back to the way it was. Now this is why I said we should open the layers. Now what I want you to do is go to each of the layers and then pay particular attention down in the bottom left corner where it says fill and stroke. The fill, as you can see for this shape, is black and there is no stroke. That's exactly what we want on every single shape. So we're going to go through them. We're going to select the next shape. Take a look at the bottom left corner. If it's got a fill and no stroke, that's exactly what we need. And again, and again, and we keep going until we start finding the paths like this one. Now, as you can see, this one has a stroke and no fill. That's not what we want. So whenever we find a path which has no fill and just a stroke, I want you to keep it selected, come up to path, and then stroke to path. We're going to go through the rest of these and we're going to make sure that every single shape has a fill but no stroke. Now when it comes to the eyes and the eyebrows, there really is no need for them to stay in the design for the moment. Drag over the eyes and the eyebrows and you can move them out of the way. Because all we're going to need for the moment are these shapes. So Control-Alt-C or stroke to path, and it will change it from stroke to fill. Now once you are done, you will have nothing but fill shapes. Now every single time that you did stroke to path, all that did was change the strokes into a complete solid path. For example, if I was to create just a normal line and increase the thickness by using the stroke style tab. Now as you can see, this looks like a rectangle, but that's only because I've zoomed in on it and turned up the thickness. It becomes obvious that this is only a stroke when you use the node tool, because you will see there is only 1, 2 nodes, and when you highlight it, you see the center line highlighted in blue like this. That shows you that it is just a simple path from one point to another. When you stroke to path by going to path and then stroke to path, it has now changed it into its own shape, which is a visual representation of the stroke. So it was a stroke with point A and point B, but now it has 4 different nodes from each corner, and you can manipulate it in any way you see fit. So that is what has happened every single time that we went to each of the individual shapes and said stroke to path. Now with simpler designs, it would be fairly easy just to go through and you could highlight everything and then stroke to path. But where we have a mixture of paths and shapes and completely closed paths and open paths as well, and if you want to know what the difference between an open and a closed path is, you can go back to the previous tutorial and I do an explanation within that video. But for now, we have all the shapes that we need. So now we just have to highlight everything, and then we can go to Path Union. Now what this has done has created a complete path. Now there is one thing that you should keep in mind. If we zoom in on, say, this part of the hat, as you can see, there is a few little issues there. Now that is not a problem with what you've done, it's a problem with the way that Inkscape has used the stroke to path, but it isn't a hard problem to fix. If you simply double click on the shape or use the node tool, the double click will just get you to the node tool quicker. Then we can select, say, this, delete, and delete that one as well, and then just tweak to make sure it all lines up. Now from this moment on, we need to take a copy of what we already have. The shapes that we're going to be using will mean that it will get rid of the copy that we are about to make. So in order to do that, we right click, duplicate, and then I'm just going to slide that over to the side. Now what we're going to do with this shape, we are going to go to path and simply go to break apart right here. Now what that has done, it has taken every single shape that is visible within the design and made it its very own shape. This will become obvious when you select the canvas to deselect everything, like so. And what we're going to do is come down to the very bottom until we select the outermost shape, like so. Now that we've got hold of that shape, we can move it out of the way and delete. But now it becomes obvious why we did that. Each of these shapes are now completely separate and easy to maneuver. So with this, we can select everything. We can come up to this top properties toolbar and we can group. Now with it grouped, we can select our original shape. We can hold shift and select our original shape. And if we come to the align and distribute menu, we can center it up. Now, if you haven't got the align and distribute menu open, you can find it right here with this red line and the 3 grey boxes. Click that and it will open it up for you. And then we can center it on the vertical and the horizontal axis. Now that gives us the opportunity to select each of the individual shapes and shade them in or color them in exactly the way that we want. But first, we are going to need to ungroup, like so. Now you can find the ungroup and group in their own little section right up here on the top toolbar. Now for this, we are going to just give the base colors of Santa. So we're going to create a red hat, a white rim, grey beard, red tongue, that kind of thing. Now, one thing I do want to mention, just in case you have a problem with it yourself, as you can see, when I select the back of Santa's mouth, you can see that it's not quite lined up correctly, and you could use the arrow keys, but yes, as you can see, it doesn't really work. When you use your mouse, you're trying your best to get it to line up, but oh my god, well there you go, I've done it perfect on that side, but it's messed up on this side, and now I go to this side and oh, it's messed up on the top. There is an easier way. Just turn the snapping on, just like so. Once you have the snapping turned on, it will snap to the relevant corner. Now if you get a very thin line like you can see on my screen here, this is not because there is a gap. This is just as an indication of where one shape ends and another one begins. So do not worry, that will not show up later on. If snapping gets in the way, as it sometimes can, just turn the snapping off and then you can re-enable it afterwards. And again, just to be more precise, as you can see, there is a white gap around the top and right side of his nose. By having snapping turned on, I can click into place until I get it right. Now we come on to shading. Shading can be very, very tedious. It can be one of those things that a lot of people will struggle with. Well, for me, I believe all you have to do is add a few shapes here and there to give the illusion of shading. If you watch anything like Bob Ross, he's not painting the details.
Just tap down with a fan brush. This is one of the neatest ways I've ever come up with in making the illusion of a lot of little trees that live far away.
He's painting the illusion of details. Certain brush strokes in certain ways will create details that you never thought you could, and it will do it very quickly. Well, graphic design is no different. For example, we need to decide where the light is coming from. Now I reckon I'm going to have the light coming from the right hand side. So all the areas on the right hand side are going to be covered with highlights, and all the areas on the left hand side, like the side of his head here, are going to be shaded. So in order to do this, all our individual shapes are already here. So all we have to do is use the pen tool to create some more shapes. I'm going to show you on the rim of his hat here and give you a perfect example of what you can do. Now this is one of the areas that I was mentioning. If snapping gets in your way, simply turn it off and then re-enable it afterwards. Or you can just keep it off while you're doing the shading. Now I'm going to create some shadows. Shadows that will be on the left hand side of every shape. So it's going to be on the left hand side around here. It's going to be on the left hand side here, the left hand side of his face, the left hand side of his beard. I will show you what I mean. Now I'm going to start by using the pen tool, and I'm going to turn snapping off because I don't want it to get in the way. I'm going to come up to this section here, and I'm going to click and drag to get a nice little bend on it. It does not have to be perfect at all. It just needs to be enough to give you the illusion of a shadow. Now once you have the curve correct, you can simply go around the outside until you get back to the start point. And we're going to do that again for everywhere we want a shadow. We are only paying attention to where the shapes we are creating overlap the shapes that we want to add shadows to. So this little section here is the only section we're paying attention to. Now I want another little section here, but I only want it to be like a warped triangle right in the corner. Now for this one, we are paying attention to this bit, but I don't want it to go any lower because then it will cut into the rest of the shape. And this is where I can add little shapes that are not there, but that will give the illusion that there are lines there that you just cannot see. So for example, I'm going to take this line here and I'm going to follow the curve and come down just a little bit. I just want a very slight shape, like so. And the only part we are paying attention to again is the part that overlaps the white. And again, I'm going to do it for this little point here. And what I'm doing there, just to stop it from curling where I don't want it to, I'm just right clicking to temporarily stop the path. But what you might find if you do this and then say you don't quite select the shape properly and you go, oh no, what have I done? I've lost that shape. No, you haven't. All you have to do is simply Control and Z. The shape that you previously created is still there. If you come to the node tool, you can see it right there. By selecting it, you will get the nodes back up again, then go back to your pen tool and carry on where you left off. And there we go. Now, before I continue, I just wanted to show you what it will look like once you have completed it. So we're going to use a method which is going to make sure that all these pieces that are overlapping will still create a new shape. For this, we are going to select the hat, and then we are going to right click, duplicate, and then with it still selected, we're going to hold shift, select the shape, then go to path, intersection. Now, as you can see, what that has done is it creates a new shape. But for this new shape, we do not need the stroke. So we're going to come down to the bottom swatches. We're going to hold shift and press the X. This little X will always remove the fill or remove stroke, depending on whether you have got shift held. Now, what we want is we don't want it to be white, but we don't want it to be very dark either. So we're going to use, I think, around 10% grey. Maybe do a little bit more than that. Maybe 30%. Yeah, 30% looks about right. And what we are going to do is repeat this entire process with all the other shapes. However, you can do a shortcut when it comes to doing this method. You can select all the shapes you've created, like this, and then go to Path, Union. That makes them all one complete shape, or one series of shapes. Then you can use the same process, selecting the main hat, right click, duplicate, then hold shift, select the shapes, and then path, intersection. And as you can see, it has now created the shapes that you wanted. And each time made sure that they're perfectly aligned. And again, we come down to the swatches, we hold shift and press the X swatch. And then we match the grey colour, which was 20%, was it? Or 30%. And now if you want to break these up and move one individual part, it is as simple as going to path and break apart. We now have our separate shapes. Now for this one in particular, as you can see, it's not quite right. So we're going to select it and we're going to move it. Like so. Now when it comes to overlapping shapes like this, you do not have to worry too much, because at the end we are going to select the outline and we're going to bring that to the top. And when we bring it to the top, as you can see, the stroke covers the rest. Now when it comes to making shadows, this is pretty much the way you should be doing it. But as you know, nothing is going to be strictly white. So just by simply selecting these shapes, we can tweak them to look a little bit more grey and still keep the same principles. What we are going to be doing is using this lighter grey, and then we can use bright white to highlight the other side. Now what I want to show you is a method that isn't perfect, but does do the job exactly like you need. By selecting the shape that you want to add shadow or highlights to, this time I'm going to use it for the highlights. I'm going to right click, we're going to duplicate this shape, and then we're going to do that again. Right click and duplicate. So now we have 3 shapes for the hat. What we want to do is we want to take one, hold Control, and simply slide it over a little bit. Now if you want to be able to tell the difference, you can change the color. It's not going to matter. I'm going to take snapping off, for example, on this one. And again, what I am paying attention to is this area here. Now once we have the area we want, with this still selected, we are going to hold shift, select the other red shape, and then we are going to go to path, difference. Now if I move this over to the side, as you can see, what that has done has left us with something that looks a little bit like this. Now all these other shapes we are not going to need, so we go to path and we break apart. Then we hold shift, select the shape we want to keep, and then just hit delete for the rest. Now when we move this shape over, if we select a lighter shade by going to the fill and stroke, under the fill tab, if we lighten that shade a little bit and then move that back, as you can see, it gives the impression of a highlight. We can do exactly the same on the rim of his hat and for his beard with little shapes like this, just to give the impression of light hitting from the right hand side. But with this shape, because we have already got it set to 7.5 grey, any highlights that we use now would be white. So we take the pen tool again, and highlights don't tend to be as thick as shadows. So now, as you can see, this isn't quite right. So just by simply going to the nodes tool, you can select the line and you can tweak it in any way you like until you get it right. That looks about good to me. We're going to select the rim of the hat, right click, duplicate, select the shape we've just created, and of course you know this by now, path, intersection. Take away the stroke by clicking the X in the bottom left corner, and of course make it white. Now because we have the light coming from around here, you can also just add some extra little shapes to your design. You can add some extra shapes to things like his mustache and his beard in order to give the illusion of detail. I will use the mustache as an example. Now instead of creating just a simple shape that comes along the bottom, you can create a shape that varies and it will give the illusion of hair within the mustache. For example, I will create the shape and then I will show you exactly what I mean. Now simply by making points like this, when it comes to this one being shaded, we're going to come down to the swatches. We'll select the red X to take away the stroke, and then we're going to add the same again, 30% grey. And once that has been done, we can come to our select tool, select the mustache, right click, duplicate, and then we are going to select the grey shape while holding shift, path, intersection. And now when I zoom out, as you can see, the difference it has made actually looks really good. Now if you want this to be more of a very subtle difference, you can of course select all the shapes that you want to shade with and turn them down until you get somewhere that looks more suitable, like there. Now you know how to add the shapes and how to make them completely aligned with the shapes that you've already got. You can also add a few different little methods that is going to make a whole lot of difference. For example, underneath his mouth there is nothing there, but simply by going to your pen tool and creating an extra little shape and then colouring that in the same way, you can even use the dropper tool and then take away the stroke. Now when I deselect everything, it gives a whole lot more depth to the graphic. You can also use other little methods in order to layer over the top and give yourself a much better design. For example, if we was to take the eyes and bring them back into the design, obviously we are going to need to raise them to the top, like so. There is one thing that Santa always has. He always has a very reddish nose and he always has reddish cheeks. Now for that, if we were just to add a red circle, it would look okay, but yeah, it just doesn't quite work. And then you could be selecting it and trying to lower the opacity to try and get it to look quite right, but it is still very sharp. Well, a method you can use for this is by simply turning up the blur. Now we have a little circle for the nose. By simply increasing the blur, we can soften it. And then by using the blur and the opacity, just by turning it down and having it very, very subtle with a lot of blur, we have now created a little shine on Santa's nose. And again, if we use exactly the same shape by right clicking and duplicating it, we can move that over to both sides of his cheeks. And now when we zoom out, he looks like he has rosy red cheeks and a rosy red nose. Now when it comes to the bobble of his hat, well, there are different ways that you could go about it. But what you're going to see me do is the exact opposite of what I have been doing up until now. I'm going to use the entire shape as darkness, and the highlights that I add are going to be the little shapes in between. So for example, I'm going to take this little shape in the center and I'm going to extend it just a little to make that one little highlight. And then I might use the tips of here and here as the extra little highlights. But for the most part, this entire shape is going to be the same as the shadows. Now, a little point that is worth mentioning, if you create a shape like this and then it ends up being over the top of the stroke, come up to the layer shortcuts here and just drop the selection one step until it drops right below. Now, one thing that I do want to mention, there is another method that you can use in certain instances. It's called overlay, and it has everything to do with the blend mode that you use. Now, this is more of a tweaking feature, but it is worth mentioning. And I'm going to use a perfect example on his skin tone. Now, if we come to his nose, and we want to shade one side of his nose and keep the other one clear. Now, as you know, the light is coming from over here, and that means the shadow will be on the bottom and the left hand side. So with that in mind, we are going to take this shape, duplicate, and then we are going to duplicate again. And now if we just bring it ever so slightly down, and we will change the color just so it makes it easier for you to see the difference. With them both selected, we can go to Path, Difference. And we have this shape left here. Now, if we select black for this shape, it would be a little bit too much, as you can see. But if we come down to the fill and stroke menu, right down near the bottom, it says blend mode. Now, this is not going to really work for this design, but it is worth knowing. If you select the drop down and scroll down to where it says overlay, what this will do is it will overlay the color that you've got, but it will use the properties of whether it is dark or light. So obviously black, very dark, white, very light. And if you select the overlay, it will use that in order to punch the color underneath way more vividly. It will give reds a more of a hue. It will give the browns or the skin tones more of a deep saturation. For example, like this. Now that you've got this can highlight things a whole lot more just by adding saturation. But as you can tell, it doesn't really work with this because it's more of a cartoon feel. However, if you had a light, for example, you can use the overlay and then turn the blur up to give yourself that nice little glow. Now, even doing that for this design, as you can tell, it looks a whole lot better, and you could get away with using it, but I'm just saying that is something that you can keep in mind and play around with the blend modes because they are very, very good. You have everything from hard light to soft light, and as you can see, the difference it makes can make a massive change to the entire composition. That's just an extra tip for you to keep in mind. However, as you can see, just by adding the shadows now, you have got a Santa graphic that looks way, way better. Now, one more method that you can also use for when it comes to shading is simply just to darken the original color. So for example, the skin tone that we have here for Santa, if we select the shape we want to use, like this one that I've just created, we can simply go to the dropper tool, select the color that we wish to copy. In this case, it is the skin tone, and then simply come to the fill and stroke menu and slide the saturation down or the darkness. And just like that, we've created a little shadow for the hat. But of course, his nose is going to be sticking out a little bit more, so that is going to have a light highlight on the top and more of a darkness underneath. Now, it's worth mentioning, because I have placed this shape above this one, the shininess of his nose has not quite shown through. Well, this is simply because of the layers. By selecting the shiny part, and we can raise that to the top, it will obviously go over the top. But simply by making these little changes, adding little shapes, you have created your Santa graphic. Now, obviously, I was just running through this very quickly to show you, but these are the methods that you use to bring your designs to life. And as you can see, the difference is incredible. Now, if you found this useful, please let me know in the comments section below. And if you want to send me your attempts at doing this, please do that as well. All the information you need is in the description down below. Until next time, I'm going to bid you all a fond farewell, say thank you for watching, and I hope this tutorial helped you. If you have any problems, let me know and I will help the best I can. Until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful Christmas. I might do one more upload before the new year, so watch out for that. Until then, I'm going to bid you all a fond farewell and see you in the next one.